Jeffrey was just noting, we were talking about Twitter briefly as we were walking in, and he was noting that when Tufty followed him, he felt like, oh, that's the day I can just, sign out, I'm done. That's the big deal. But when I just started getting started in visualization about 9 or 10 years ago, Jeffrey was one of the academics who was doing things in visualization at the time, and it was very hard to find people who were doing things. And also, he sort of set himself apart, I think, by making his work very accessible to people outside of the academic field. And so I sort of latched onto him as somebody who was doing stuff in visualization. And I sort of, kept him on my radar as someone to watch. And then on October 3rd, 2012, Jeffrey joined Twitter. I think he was the last person on the planet to join Twitter. And then on October 5th, he followed me. And I was at home, and I was working on my laptop, and I was just like, oh my gosh, Jeffrey here just followed me. And my husband, who knows nothing about Twitter, was like, well, are you going to follow him back? I don't think he even knew what that meant. And I said, well, you don't not follow Jeffrey here. And I tweeted that, of course. I had to tweet that. And then, of course, I made Jeffrey blush, which I was very proud of. That was a proud day for me. But I thank you, Jeffrey, for reaching out to such a wide audience for the seminar series. I think it's fantastic, and I love watching the videos of people who have presented here. So just a little bit more about Periscopic. If you don't know who we are, we're a socially conscious data visualization firm. And if you don't know what data visualization is, I'm not sure why you're here. You just want to come see free talks, I guess. But data visualization sort of means different things to different people. And to Periscopic, data visualization means taking things that are intangible, so things like numbers or statistics, things in databases and spreadsheets, and making them not only visual and visible, but creating an experience around those numbers as well. So we worked on projects anywhere from telling stories about the habitat of polar bears and the threats to the polar bears because of climate change, or the change in how the warming ocean temperatures affect salmon populations. We've worked on projects about the historical context of income inequality, a wide range of things. And for the past year, I've been talking a lot about our process because it was really fascinating to me. It didn't really occur to me until about 2 years ago that we actually go through a creative process to do data visualization. So we take these raw numbers and these things that are really intangible, which is typically done by a data scientist or a statistician or somebody, a computer programmer, somebody who knows numbers and understands databases and how to work those things and how to clean them up and program around them. And then they take them and make them into something beautiful. And so it didn't really dawn on me that that was actually a creative process, because I don't think it dawns on most people that that's a creative process. So for the past year, I've been really talking about how we do that, and it changes as I learn how we do that. We just sort of do it, and we don't really think about how it's done. So I've been sort of dissecting that and going along and telling people more and more about how we do that. And then I started really fixating on the thing I think at the core of it, and really what happens at the very genesis of a project, which is we really have to get at the core of what that data is. So the emotional side of it. We have to get back to the data source. And what I mean, when I say data source, I don't mean the people gathering the data and the people who, are in the fine print as the data source, but I mean the actual thing that's creating the data. And so you could think of it as though, when that data comes to you, you're really sort of far along on the process. You're really sort of on like chapter 4 of where this data has come from, right? So there's the what I like to call the things doing their things, which is the data creation. So whatever that is, it's salmon swimming in an ocean, it's polar bears dying, whatever. It's me standing here, my height is 5'5". That data comes from me, I created it. The data doesn't exist without me. So that's really chapter 1, and that's when you get to chapter 4, you're doing the data visualization, and all of these things have come before. The data's been created, it's been gathered and parsed, and it's maybe been analyzed, hopefully been analyzed, or you do that as part of the visualization. But I think a lot of people start at chapter 4 without really going back and looking at chapter 1. And that's really what this talk is about, and why it's important, and how it really allows us to use data as sort of a looking glass back into a connection, back into a connection with that data source. So if it's people or animals or whatever the case is, or the environment, it allows us to create that connection. And that's how I want people to use data. And I started thinking about this about the time a friend of mine moved down here to the Bay Area. And she and I are terrible at keeping in contact even when we live close to each other. We both have children, we both have busy lives, it's hard to keep in touch, it's hard to, pick up the phone, and email is always kind of cumbersome, and texting has this protocol, and it was just like, we need a better way of just staying in touch. And so we wanted to stay in touch passively. We didn't want it to be this whole protocol-based communication. And I was in New York at Google, and I visited with Alexander Chen, and he just offhandedly on his phone was showing me Google Latitude and how he uses it with his wife to make sure that somebody's picking up their daughter from daycare at the end of the day. And it allowed them to see in real time where the other person was. They're sharing their information. And it was great. I was like, yes, this is exactly what I need. It's totally passive. I could see my friend, and she could see me, and it's perfect. And so we started using it, and this is me, and my little icon there. That's our office, Periscopic, in the Pearl in Portland. So you could see it real time, and if I go out and walk down the street, my little icon goes do 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 do. It's real time. It's nice and simple and easy. And I got this funny sensation once I started using this, that I would go out to lunch, or I'd be walking down the street to run an errand or something, and I kind of felt like there was this little fingertip on top of my head as I was walking around. Or I felt like there was this little bird fluttering around me. And it was just this nice sensation that there's something else out there, there's something else that's a part of this experience that's not right next to me, but it's there with me. And so one day, not too long after we started using this, I was having this terrible day. Just everything went wrong, and it was at the end of the day, and I was at home working. It was late at night, and I realized that I had left something at work that I needed to get my work done. And I was just like, oh, I was so frustrated. It was just the worst day. Like nothing could get worse. And so the kids were in bed. My husband was asleep. I didn't wake anybody up to tell them I was leaving. I just got in the car and I drove back to work. And this is my path back to work. And so right about there, I was on I-5. I got on I-5 South, and about 10 seconds after I did that, I get a text from my friend. It said, keep driving. And it was like, it wiped away the whole day, because nobody in the world knew where I was, and I had not even thought about Latitude or someone seeing me out there. And all of a sudden, there was this connection with that person. And it was just this wonderful feeling that just wiped away all the crummy stuff. And what I realized was that she saw me in these two numbers, a geocoordinate, right? And they're two tiny numbers that are just a dot on a map, but she saw me in that. And I felt love through that moment of these two numbers. It enabled a really emotive moment for us, and it allowed us to see each other and have an experience just through those two tiny numbers. Around the same time, the Newtown school shootings happened. And I took off my data hat for a while, and I just sort of turned off. I didn't want to see those people as numbers. I didn't want to think about the numbers that were kind of swirling around that whole tragic event. And I was really hoping that America could rise above charts and graphs and just do something. And, just anything. It didn't, to me, it was like, do we really need a chart or a graph to show us that something is horribly wrong in our society? Can't we just move on? And then, of course, the barrage of charts and graphs came along and all the bickering and fighting about all of these issues. And it really was deflating to me. And then, in the midst of all that, this started floating around Twitter, and a friend of mine at Twitter called it the chart that broke the camel's back. And to me, it was really the chart that broke the camel's back. It was somebody who would population-adjusted mass shootings in America. And he wrote a whole essay on how, it was his premise was, as long as mass shootings aren't increasing at a rate faster than population growth, then that's cool, or that's all right, right? And so that's his whole idea, and, I don't know, maybe some people argue that's okay. To me, that's not okay. I don't think it should exist. I don't think we should have to put those words in the title of a graph. I also had a problem with this graph. It was incredibly dehumanizing. It's black and white, and it's as stark as you can be. So it really prompted me to start thinking, maybe we should just do something about it. My business partner, Dino, at the time tweeted, anybody who wants to do a project about gun visualization or gun violence, let us know, we'll work for free. And nobody contacted us, and it was like, really, let's do something. And everybody in the office was really, they wanted to use their skills to do something better in the world. They wanted to put our skills to good use. So we started thinking about it, and around that time, a good friend of mine, Jerome Cukier, who used to work at OECD, had contacted the FBI and gotten these raw statistics. And he sent me this file, and he just randomly sent it to me out of the blue, and the email was so terse, it just said, I thought you might like this. And I read the title of the file, and it was Homicides 2010. And I thought, that's really disturbing that somebody knows that I would like a file that had that title. And so I sat on the file for a while, because it was too much to deal with, and in the midst of all of that horror. But we finally opened it up, and I've worked with FBI data before, and I don't know if any of you have ever worked with the FBI Uniform Crime Report, but it's really sterile. They aggregate everything up to this absurd degree, so you can't really relate any of the data to each other. I have a real problem with aggregate data. But this data was from their NIBRS, which is the National Incident-Based Reporting System. And Jerome had filled out I think like a FOIA request or something to get this, and it's every single homicide in the U.S. in 2010. And when I looked at it, it was like, wow, that's amazing. We have to do something with that. And we started talking about it internally, and our office is full of a lot of really liberal and progressive people, and so we had a lot of very strong opinions that this should be about gun control. But even within gun control, there were people like, it needs to be about this or it needs to be about that. And we started sort of fighting about these things internally. And it was sort of amazing to me that we could be so like-minded, yet we could be so divisive as well. We weren't really coming together on anything. And it made me realize that, this shouldn't be about one particular thing. It shouldn't be about gun control. It shouldn't be about mental health care, whatever the case may be. It really should be about the victims, because that's the data we had. And we had a lot of information. We had their age, their race, their gender, their relationship to the killer. We had information about the killer and what their demographics were as well. We had what the circumstances were of the killing in many cases. And so we made a gun visualization. I'm going to show a quick video of it. But I only want to preface it by saying we focused just on all of the people that were killed. And we filtered out everything, like anything that wasn't a gun homicide. And it doesn't have suicides. It doesn't have accidental deaths. It's just people who were killed by guns. And so I'll show a quick video of it. And I'll explain it a little bit. So basically, each line represents a person, and it goes according to time in the year. So this is January. And when a person is killed, a little dot shows up for them, tells what age they were killed at. And then the gray line is what we predict they would have died from if guns hadn't existed. So we create sort of an alternate life for people based on statistics from the World Health Organization. And so we figure out, based on probabilities, how old may they have lived, what would they have died from. We have all the causes of death for every age. So we can tell people would have died from heart disease or cancer or, who knows what. They may also have been killed by, they may have been killed by another person as well, without guns. But it's kind of heartbreaking to sit there and watch it all play out. You have to sit there quite a while, and it goes super, super fast. And then we explored the distribution of this violence, and it's very striking to see. Over here are the people who died from guns, and on the gray side are the people who, that's what their alternate life could have been. And we have filters for filtering by ethnicity or by sex. You can roll over a line and find out all the details about that person that we had. It's a white man who was shot at age 20 during an argument. We can filter by, children. These are all, 12% of these people were kids. They were kids who were 18 or younger. It's kind of striking to see that, and you could see each individual child up there and find out more about them. This is particularly horrifying to me, the multiple victim killings, because the federal government defines mass shootings as an incident that involves 4 or more killings, which doesn't even make it onto the nightly news in most cases. It has to be 8 or 10 people these days before it makes the news, and we hear about these things. Filtering by rifle, different types of gun types as well. But the thing with multiple killings is that when we looked at the data, there were tons of incidents that were, 2-person killings or 3-person killings. And a lot of them were familial. A child and their mother shot by a father, or vice versa. 2 children killed by one of their parents or a caregiver. It's really heartbreaking when you look at these specific details and you start to get that connection back to each and every one of these people. And it's not just a dot on a line. It's not just part of a bar chart. You actually see each individual person in this visualization. And we really wanted, again, for this not to be about a specific cause, or we weren't trying to carry the torch for gun control. I would love it if people just threw away their guns. I mean, I am probably the most liberal person who worked on this, and I was like, let's just take all the guns away. I'm ready to do that. So it wasn't about driving people towards one action. It was really about opening people's eyes and hoping that they would make any action in their lives. So maybe this could open up something in them. The emotive part of this could let them see into something else and see into an actual life and see that maybe they could make some change. They could do something in their own world. They could become more involved in their community. Maybe they could become a big brother, a big sister. Maybe they could intervene when they start to see the warning signs of domestic violence. Maybe they could just not turn a blind eye if they start to see something that's giving them a red flag. And that's really what we're hoping with all of these things, is that it doesn't take a bunch of people with huge actions.
2 questions. The first is, if the goal is kind of behavior change, I'm curious why the focus on the kind of statistics and identity politics of the victim versus the killer versus the kind of class correlation.
Yeah, we focused on the victim primarily because we felt that had the most impact. It was about the loss of life. We felt like we were showing, there's a huge loss of potential, and that's why we put the years of stolen life up here. And it was more about, look at this, the tragedy of it. It wasn't so much about let's get angry at these killers. And we hope that, by certain, we're changing it a bit too. We're going to add in more filters down here, but by using things like gun type that are, will lead people to certain conclusions about, gun control. They can start to have more of an opinion about the factors that go into it. But we felt that by focusing on the victims and showing that loss of potential, that was really our goal, was to show, there are babies that would never grow old. There are kids who are headed to college who had so much left to do in life. And that was, what we were trying to trigger with people.
My second question had to do with, so there's this notion of, in identity politics, of kind of intersectionality, which talks about how difference, like you have the different dimensions of identity kind of interrelate and correlate. So I'm curious, from the information visualization perspective, the stories that you mentioned are intersectional stories about someone at a specific age and point in their lives. Like, have you thought about how you might be able to use Viz to kind of tell these more intersectional stories instead of looking at it just per dimensional basis?
Yeah, that's really an interesting take on it. I think that some of the features that we're adding to it might get more at what you're getting towards. We're adding in live data for 2013. It's going to be released in a couple of weeks. It's if you want to visit it, it's guns.periscopic.com. And we'll be rolling out those features soon. But it will allow you to sort of look at a few different factors that go into those lives, so you can really get into specifics about, specific demographics or specific situations. So that might get more at what you're talking about. But I'd love to discuss that more and hear your ideas on it. While we were going through this project, though, there was a lot of discussion about the language we were using, because we tend to hide behind words a lot. We tend to use fancier words or more clinical terms for things if they just sound bad. We don't want to talk about people being killed. We want to talk about homicides because that's easier. That sounds like something I spray on my crops in the summertime, And we really challenged ourselves to use real words and plain language. If you've seen the Economist writing style guide, we really tried to use that as our guide moving through this project. It talks a lot about using plain language, and it talks about how to talk about numbers, and it gets at a very human level of speech, at language, and at numbers, which was really inspirational for us. I encourage people to read that if they do any writing. And so we really challenged ourselves to focus on the actual words, because, if we hide behind those words, it's really, we're shielding ourselves from those emotions. And the emotions are really what we need to get at these problems and start making these changes. And I mean, it happens in every field practically, anything that has anything tough to deal with. My oldest son was diagnosed with cancer when he was 9 months old, and they used a lot of words that were really big and fancy. And, when they were diagnosing him, they said, oh, he has a nephroblastoma. And I was like, oh, okay, great. Is that something that helps him get into Yale, or what is that? And they're like, no, that's kidney cancer. Oh, okay, well, just tell me that. Or, loss of heterozygosity. I was like, oh, great, he has a loss of it. We don't want that heterozygosity. And they're like, no, you want that. That's a tumor suppressor. Oh, well, that's kind of crazy. And it wasn't until he was in surgery, and it was, the day after all of this blew up, and they had only seen pictures of his cancer through MRIs and X-rays, and so they were going in to assess what was actually happening with his kidneys and see what was happening for the first time. And so we were waiting in a waiting room, and if you've ever had somebody go through surgery, there's this big waiting room where all the families and loved ones sit, and So we're in the waiting room, and the surgeon comes in, and they take us to a smaller room. You do not want to go to the smaller room. Trust me. It's a very nice, comfy room. It's kind of like your house. It's comfortable, and it's low lighting, and you immediately become suspicious because it's like that person that's too nice to you. You're like, why are you being nice to me? It's like, why is there this nice room in the hospital? And it doesn't feel right. I don't want to be here. And the surgeon said, we have to remove William's right kidney, and we have to remove 30% of his left kidney. And it was like there was a nuclear bomb that went off on all these words. It was like they just were completely obliterated. And I suddenly was like, that's all I need to know. You know, the plan of action was already sort of set in course. There's nothing, I mean, I could have said, no, you can't take that out. But, I mean, you wouldn't want to do that because you would die. So there's like a protocol that had to be followed. But it sort of enabled me to see what was happening, you know, make that connection through those words. Like, it enabled me to stabilize myself and my emotions because now I knew what it was real, and I can move forward. So those words really helped me, and they were just plain, simple words, and they were the bluntest words I've ever heard anybody say. This is the most depressing talk you'll ever hear. It's going to get worse. I'm sorry. I know there are a lot of students here getting credit for this, and you're working for it today. So this is not fun stuff. But as I was thinking about language, I realized there are also words that we try to hide. We try to hide these words. We try to stuff them in a dark closet and get away from them as much as we can. Nobody talks about this word. Nobody says rape. Unless you're a woman, and especially if you're a young woman, you will probably, end up talking to your friends about it because rape is a women's issue, right? Which is kind of ironic because it's not at all a women's issue, it's a men's issue. For the most part, there is a percentage of women who do rape, but generally speaking, this has become a women's issue. And I mean, I've never heard men talk about rape unless I force them to talk about it, which is pretty interesting. And I find that they really don't have a grasp of how to think about it. And it was kind of profound to me. But it's a word that sort of only comes up when women are in a group of a safe group of other women, you know, and maybe a small group of friends or relatives or whatever, and it usually comes up around, you know, somebody's daughter is going to college, or, gee, I moved into a new area, or I moved into this apartment and I'm not sure it's safe, and, you know, sort of these issues that we all have to deal with. And so I was at dinner one night with some friends of mine, and we got started talking about rape and sexual assault because of, I don't even remember what it was at the time. And we were sort of frustrated by the fact that it was such a hidden word and nobody talked about it and nobody really, and we also were feeling like kind of lost, like we didn't have enough information to really navigate our worlds. And so we said, you know, we were getting all riled up, and we said, why can't we just put a sign up for every rape that's happened in the city? And suddenly the room got quiet, and we're like, maybe we could. We could put a sign up for every rape in the city. That's kind of bizarre. And so they said, Kim, you're the data person. Go find that out. So I went out and found that, in fact, we could find all the rapes in the city. And it was pretty amazing. This is well before Periscopic got started. This is, you know, before I realized I was into data visualization. So Portland police puts out all of their crime reports, and this was back in 2002, which was pretty remarkable for the time. They put it all online. It was freely accessible and completely open. So I said, fantastic. We all got together, and I said, here's the data I have. I have a neighborhood, and I have a date. And they said, we have a neighborhood and a date? Are you kidding me? That's like the most sparse information you could ever get about anything. But to me, it was so rich because that neighborhood, I know that neighborhood because I live in that city, and I know the coffee shop that I go to in that neighborhood. And that date, I can look up on my calendar, and I could say, oh, I had coffee with Ted that day. And oh, by the way, someone was raped 20 blocks away from me. So it suddenly was like very rich and personal. And when I look back at that file, every time I would open it up, it was like those dates were just screaming at me. there was this connection coming in through that data that was just screaming at me to do something with it. And so we did. We went out and we made signs for every rape in the city. And it seems kind of insane right now, looking back at it. But we did it. And, we didn't have the gender of the person. We didn't have any specifics. We just had it. This picture is pretty poor, but there's actually a very light map on the back behind the words. And so it shows the neighborhood that it's in. And we drove around in my friend's Camry late at night with hammers, and we pounded these things into the ground. And it was amazing to see what happened, because when you bring that data out into the world and you sort of force it on people, the scales fall from people's eyes. They were just, the response was really amazing. People would run after us down the street and say, "Are you kidding me? This happened in my neighborhood? How do you know this? And who was it? And what happened?" And they wanted to know everything. Most of the times we just say, "I don't know anything more than what the sign says." But yes, it happened. And it was making that horrible incident visible to people. People would hug us. People would come up and want to tell us their life stories. And people would come up and tell us about their rape stories too. It was pretty amazing. People would cry. I remember a specific incident where we were walking down the street, and these two huge guys, each walking a pit bull. They looked like linebackers. If I had been alone on the street, I would have walked the other direction. And they had been reading the signs, and they came over to us, and they were like, "What?" They were so stunned and so stymied. They didn't even know what questions to ask. They were like, "Is this real?" They were in a different world or something. They were like, "Is this real?" We're like, "Yes, it's real." And we got the data from the Portland Police Bureau, and these are all actual dates. They couldn't even wrap their heads around it. And it was so shocking to me that these two men who I think they were just so into their own world that they never occurred to them to think about that. So to me, it was fantastic. They talked to us for about 15 minutes about it, and it was wonderful. It was great to make that connection with somebody I would probably never, ever would have connected with on this topic any other way. And it was just amazing. And my hope is that those people will, these are two huge guys with pit bulls. Hopefully they will now be watchdogs for their neighborhood. Maybe they will, spot something before it happens. Maybe they'll educate their friends. I don't know what will happen. I don't know what did happen with them, but hopefully, hopefully that carries on into the world. But the data really, again, it allows us to make these connections back to people. And that is like a tiny, tiny bit of little bitty information that we just put into the world. There was a woman who came up to us and told us her rape story. And she said, "I want to put one of these signs in the ground." And we said, "Fantastic, have at it." And she took a hammer and she obliterated that sign. That thing was in shreds. It was amazing. And it gave her an opportunity to fight back, And those kind of connections, we couldn't have made them any other way. And while I don't consider this, part of my visualization portfolio, when I look back on it, it really is visualization. It's taking something that's intangible, a date, a map, something sort of abstract, and it's bringing it back into the real world. It's enabling an experience. This is a project that's not my own project, but it's a really beautiful project. It's by a group called Project AK-47. And I have one of these necklaces, but I couldn't find it. I think my children stole it from me. But it's basically, this project works with rescuing kids from their lives of being child soldiers around the world. And they, as part of their outreach, they have these dog tags that you can get. And these aren't real dog tags, of course. These kids don't walk around with dog tags. None of these guerrilla armies are that sophisticated to actually issue dog tags. But what they do is they take these very recognizable U.S. dog tags and put the information of the child on it. So the child's name is Ishmael. He's male, he's 12 years old, and he's a child soldier in the Philippine Army. It becomes very real. And when I wear mine, the dog tags are right next to my heart, and it's extremely emotional whenever I wear them. And it's such a beautiful incarnation of that data. I think it's just one of my favorite projects about data. This is thoroughly depressing, and I apologize, so I'm going to give you a bit of a reprieve here for a minute. This is my one happy slide. And actually, it's not all that happy either. He's really sad. Poor thing. It was cute, though. But I do want to talk a little bit about, it's not all doom and gloom. I feel like sometimes at Periscopic, people are walking in like, oh my God, do we really have to look at people dying and polar bears getting shot and salmon who can't breed and, all these horrible things.
Work on rape. So here at Stanford, one of the, I guess, other institutions which have a certain style, there's a kind of struggle in terms of data provenance and accuracy and anonymization. Mm-hmm. So, for example, Stanford won't necessarily report numbers on a per year basis or on a per space basis, because they say that it would kind of be stepping too far in terms of both anonymity and also asking things of the victim. So I'm curious if you've seen people that have tried to, instead of relying on self-report, like presumably those are self-report data, using kind of statistical inference on a peer report. So instead of asking the community to report how many of your peers have experienced X, as a way of uncovering the kind of missing data, essentially, that is inherent in some of these data sets. So
right. Exactly.
There's big underreport.
Yeah, that's a very good point, especially with things like rape. And, there's such, there's still a stigma surrounding rape, and there's a lot of fear with reporting. And, there are so many issues that go into that. For this piece, we felt like we wanted to stay true to the actual real data that we had, just so we could make it real about a specific incident. But we did do another project on rape that was an online piece, and it was all based on statistics. And it was based on statistics from the RAIN organization, which is probably the leading organization that deals with rape and sexual assault. And they do a lot of that internally to get at their statistics to figure out, even though a small percentage are reported, through their research, they found that, a rape happens once every 2 minutes, that, 1 in 6 women will be raped in her lifetime, that sort of thing, and 1 in 33 men. I don't want to discount that either. So we did do a piece on that, and we sort of took it, even though we had just these broad statistics, we created a story out of that as well. So we sort of created an incident based on statistics, so we sort of humanized it in a sort of a reverse way. So we knew things like what type of, we tied in RAIN statistics with the FBI's Uniform Crime Report, and they do have things like what weapon was used, if any, what kind of self-defense was used, if any, and if it helped, what kind of weapon was used, if any. I can't remember all the distinct things, but there were about 6 data points that we had. And so we created a little story about each hypothetical person. And, we had their gender. And so it actually was really beautiful because it made things like the number of men who are raped, which is, a small number, and we tend to dismiss it if we see it as just a percentage. If we see it as just 6% or whatever it is, it's such a small number, we can just dismiss it. But when we created a real story out of it, he was raped by his friend, and, under these circumstances in his dorm room and blah, blah, blah. It suddenly makes those small numbers real numbers, even if it's something that we could easily dismiss otherwise. So So yeah, I think that's really an important point to consider in terms of, what you're trying to get across, and, is it the numbers, or is it, trying to be true to a specific type of data? There are a lot of questions that can go into it in terms of messaging.
One kind of common tactic in this, or some work, is to kind of pair consciousness raising with calls to action. So looking at your kind of embodied visualization in the world, I'm curious if you thought about kind of ways to pair that call to action within that this physical representation. For example, you could have QR codes that connect to something, or even the kind of crowdsource thing. How effective would it be, or is it transformative or healing in some way for someone to take a sign and say, feeling like I was raped here, or and then put that there.
I wish you had been on the team. I love those ideas. Those are all great. Yeah, I mean, this was in 2002, before the word crowdsourcing existed. But I mean, I would have loved to continued the project and done some of those things. I mean, those are wonderful creative ideas. And that's getting exactly to what this talk is about. It's like, how do you make that connection with people through that data, through those statistics? Do you engage them through some active measure? Do you give them a way to get more information? So how do you enable that sort of two-way street through the data? I think those are all fantastic ideas. And sort of tie into, the other hypotheticals that, I was getting at, like, this is completely depressing and we focus on a lot of sad stuff. But we could also talk about things like what didn't happen. What are the missing pieces that, rape has gone down significantly since we did this project in 2002. We could take and create different signs for the rapes that have been prevented, and we could talk about why they were prevented, and I'm not sure what the reasons are, and I'm not sure anybody does, but we could talk about, better policing or better education for boys and men, better self-defense classes for women and girls. We could talk about those things through those instances as well. It doesn't always have to be just focusing on the completely bad and horrible stuff. The gun visualization, we could use it to show, if gun measures are passed, what change do they have? Do they affect things? Do people now get to live their lives? Or for cancer research, can we use it to show how many lives have been saved due to cancer research? My own son is now 5-year-old, and he's happy and healthy due to fantastic pediatric cancer research. Now there's a full protocol for his type of kidney cancer. It was like they just checked it off a list, and he's done and at home and happy. So we can use visualizations in lots of different ways, and we could show the avenues for change. If we have that information about how to change things or changes that we've made and the effect that they've had, let's allow people to see that as well, so that they can take that away and say, maybe that's something I want to get involved with, or maybe that's something I want to support because I see what an effect it has. And also getting back to those 2 data points of my friend and I, the geocoordinate that right now I'm a dot on a map right now. I'm shifting slightly. I'm not sure if my little numbers are changing all that much up here, swaying back and forth. But generally, I'm at rest here. I'm a little dot on a map at rest. But that day, I was a dot in motion, about 90 miles an hour down a deserted freeway at midnight. And just thinking about what kinds of things does those enable? What other ways can we look at that data? How do we make those connections? And, oops. So maybe my friend and I are 2 dots on a map, yes, but maybe there's like a rubber band that sort of constricts the world to us. Maybe we are just fixed in place and we're as close as we are, and our relationship is what the 2 dots represents. And maybe the map constricts and constrains to suit our relationship. Or maybe it's the angle that's created when the 2 of us look at the moon. Maybe it's the something else in the far distance that's between us, but it somehow creates this tiny, tiny, tiny number instead of those 2 dots. Maybe there's this tiny number that helps diminish that space between us. And so I just want to end with, again, that we all, if we're working with data, we have the power to go back to that chapter 1 to see what the things doing their things, what are they doing, and how do we connect to that? I know it's easy as data people, as computer people, we like to fall in love with those numbers. I know I do. Whenever I open up a database or data set, I immediately fall in love with the numbers. I see the shape, I see the relationships, and I like to play with that. But I also have to remind myself to take that step back and say, well, this actually came from somewhere. This didn't just, this is, on my desktop is not the genesis of this. It happened somewhere way back here. Maybe it was last week, maybe it was 2 years ago or 15 years ago. But it came from somewhere. And so we all have the power to go back to it, get at that information, get at that connection, and that's really where we can start to make magic happen. Thank you. Yes.
I think everybody in the room had to be struck by the flatness and, just to use an old phrase, the banality of evil kind of characterized in that flat file you had on the gun desk, right? And then that transformation you showed with kind of using the social graph and figuring out, the arcs that were interrupted was really, really striking. Did that hit you like right away when you saw that file, or was there a lot of work to kind of get to that? That's very powerful visualization. What did it take you to get there?
That is a good question, and that really varies from project to project. For this specific one, it came very fast, actually. I had been, doing some other unrelated stuff that was really inspirational to me at the time, and when we sat down and looked at these numbers, and like I said, it sort of opened up a can of worms internally, just between even us like-minded folks, and people were becoming divisive and saying, we should do this or we should do that, and a lot of people wanted to aggregate the stuff to show certain things and to make a certain point, and it's sort of like, to me, it was almost like there was this cloud that kept getting bigger and bigger, and it just kept getting messier and messier, and I don't remember exactly what it was, but somebody had said something that triggered this idea for me that it was this loss. There was a loss. And so it just, when I heard that, and it was like, yeah, it was like, that's obvious. That's what this is about. It's about this loss. And I don't know where the art came from. It seemed like it's sort of this natural way of looking at a life. There's a beginning, there's an apex, there's a waning, there's a death. So it just seemed like a natural way to show that, perhaps. And we did play around with a number of other ideas as well, showing things as lines or other, as straight lines or, other little like wiggly things and whatnot. But none of them just really felt all that natural. And this really struck people. And when we added this, the intro was really, I think, what sealed it for everybody. It was seeing those first 5 deaths that we used to just sort of explain things. And the dot that drops down that was just like, okay, this is done. That's exactly what it is. Most projects we have don't have that clarity. I think one thing that helped this project was that the data set was really small. It was less than 10,000 rows with less than 20 data points to it, I think. And that really helps us. And that's what I try to do on projects in general is if we have a lot of data, if we have just this massive amount of crazy data, I often try to chop things into manageable pieces and just take like a subset of data and focus on just that so I don't muddy the water. And then just come up with some idea for that and then extrapolate out into the rest of it if I can. But having something finite it really helps to sort of constrain things and come up with like a single metaphor for things. So, yeah.
I guess I would say thanks for the moving talk. It's really fantastic. I guess it seems like a lot of this is about drilling down to individuals to sort of make it really human scale for the people who are receiving the data. And I guess when we're talking about massive data sets, at some point aggregation is necessary. So I was wondering if you could talk about some of the tensions there and what you could get out of a more aggregate level representation.
Yeah, aggregate data is tough. I really don't like working with it. It's not only because you can't connect back to that incident, but because it removes those relationships. So if I say 80% of black people this and 20% of women this, I have no way of knowing how those 20% of women relate to those 80% of black people. You know, are they all the 27 or 20% within that 80%? Or are they scattered around, evenly distributed? I don't know. So when you aggregate, you lose so much. It's heartbreaking to me. I hate using aggregate data. But again, I mean, the other Ray project I was describing did take that aggregate data, and we sort of did a reverse on it and took those numbers and created a specific incident based on, just, choosing based on those statistics, 7% of these incidents have guns, so 7% of these stories will have a gun in them. And so we created this fictitious story, but it's all based on statistics. So that's one tactic. And, it doesn't always have to be about an incident. That's not always the way to get at people. I mean, you can do simple things like, I mean, even the showing something like this, I mean, just the color alone, changing that can really have an impact, like an emotional impact. So it's not that you have to say this specific thing happened to this specific person and this is how you should feel about it. Sometimes it's just, what you do with the color or the metaphor or the design. We did a project for about voter education called Vote Easy, and it's wildly popular. People love it, and all it is this it's a row of yard signs, like political yard signs. So when somebody's running for office, you put out a sign, so and so for Congress, and so you plug in your zip code, and it comes up with all these signs of all the people who are running for office in your area. And this is only on election year, obviously, but. And then it allows you to answer like 10 questions. How do you feel about abortion or guns or Afghanistan and blah, blah, blah. And as you're answering them, these yard signs are like coming towards you or they're going away. And it's like, you can very quickly figure out like, oh, this person is like me and that's why they're coming towards me and they're more important based on my issues. But it's incredibly emotional too, because people will be like, "Oh wait, I don't like that guy. I don't. Wait, he's coming towards me. I got to change my answer." And it's amazing how people get connected that way, and it's just based on, well, how do you feel, and how do these people feel, and it's not about like a specific instance of something. It's more of a, and these are all very broad topics, but it's somehow connecting through those numbers in kind of a fun way, as well as, an easy to understand way. It somehow makes it fun and enjoyable and lets people see things that they didn't. We had a number of people write to us and say, I had no idea that this Green Party guy was running, and two, that he's exactly what I wanted, and now I'm going to go vote for them. And, otherwise I wouldn't have voted. And some guy wrote to us and said I didn't ever care about voting, and now I just registered to vote. It was amazing. So you can find those avenues back to people and make those connections through other ways as well.
Well, so that project sounds really cool, first off, but I had another question. So it seems like a lot of your work is around charts to persuade people of things. And I've read a lot of criticism that like charts in that area often do things that are kind of misleading, like, bar charts where the bottom isn't at zero, so it looks like things have, when really there's just random variation. Are there ethics associated with?
Yes, I mean, we try to be as rigid about that as we can. I mean, we are strong proponents of following the ethics of, not, we know all of those books, and we read, we have all of the books about how to do things properly, and we've studied that since day one. We know all of those things about starting at zero and how to scale and all those things, and area versus, whatever. And so Yeah, I mean, all of those things come into play for sure, and we're very strict about them. And we also will point it out if we see somebody else who has misbehaved, and we like to out those people on Twitter and on our blog. So yeah, I mean, we're very thorough about that. And then there will always be, you know, misleading is, one category, and then there's just like changing perceptions, and guiding people in a certain way. And I mean, a lot of these causes, yeah, we want people to come away with a certain message. Does that mean we're misleading? I don't think we're misleading with numbers, but we are definitely looking for a certain type of response. So for instance, if we did a piece on salmon. We want people to know that these salmon are dying and why they're dying and why their populations are falling off and that it's related to ocean temperature. Those numbers are represented very fairly and honestly, but through design, you can also compel people to action and show them, here's our message. It's not evil to have a message or have a stance on what the data is telling you, right? If that's what you're getting at. All right. Yeah.
So throughout your talk, I felt that what you're doing is not getting back to the roots of the data, but getting back to how people relate to the data. So it seems like with those signs, the rape signs, for instance, you are physically in that place, so it's much easier to connect to that piece of data. Similarly, when you show people's ages and what they could have lived to be, then it's much easier to connect to them as people rather than dots on the screen.
Right.
So I wonder if what we want to do here is not get back to the roots of the data, but get back to how people relate to it. Is that a fair takeaway from here?
Wait, see, can you say that last sentence again?
Is it fair to say the takeaway for me for this talk is connect back to how people relate to the data rather than connect back to how the data was generated?
Right. Yes, I would say that's true. I mean, if I was gonna say how the data was generated in the case of rape, yeah, I don't want to be at that specific moment in time. But yes, I want to connect people back to that person, and that, I mean, as close as I can, get them to relate back to what was happening there and the circumstances surrounding it. Not so much about how that data that came to be. I mean, that is kind of a theoretical question as well. Like, well, what data exists? Do the data come first, or does the data source come first? Or everything is data. I always see data all around me. All these seats have data. And every single dot in the planet has data. But it's really like, what is that emotive point of that data, and what happened there? Who was that person, or what was that thing that happened? I mean, it doesn't have to be all human, and like a lot of the stuff I was talking was about people, but it could be about a roadway, or it could be about a glacier, or it could be about a lot of other things, inanimate objects. But you can still get back to that. What is that data saying to you? How does it relate to your life? A lot of our work is about telling things about the environment, and how do we frame that in terms of someone's life. And a lot of these things, they see it as like this minuscule number across the chart, and it's like, well, big deal, I'm going to be long gone before that has any impact on me. So it's you have to start finding ways to make that relatable and make that apparent to people. So that's more of what I'm talking about, I guess, is that type of connection.
Do you ever think about kind of saying, you probably have a presupposition about the data I'm about to show you, and then you show something that's relatively benign, non-concerning, et cetera, and then go to a more rich visualization, much like you did with the gunshots, say, well, that's one way to look at it, but actually this is kind of your aggregated argument, right? Here's what the aggregated data tells you, but here's what the individual stories are. Do you ever find that to be persuasional?
That's interesting. I'm not sure that we've done a project like that. That's a good question. That's a really interesting. I would like to do something like that. Now that you've given me that idea, I'll probably steal it. That's a really interesting point. We are doing one project, the one that we're doing on income inequality, deals a little bit with that. It was kind of a tough project because it's a lot of statistics and models and things that aren't, with models in particular, it's very difficult to, show that in any other way than just here's the prediction of, the next 30 years. But we tried to humanize it through illustration. So we showed, for instance, we have like a demographic breakdown of income inequality. So we have by race and by gender and whatnot. And so, they gave us a bar chart, a grouped bar chart of, here are the education levels and the race and the gender, and here's how they all break down. And you can find yourself in the little bar chart, like, oh, that's me. I'm a white woman with a, bachelor's degree, blah, blah, blah. That's where I sit. But that's really not at all emotional. But we just did basically the same thing, but we just illustrated it. So we put a person on top of each of the bars and made it nice and pretty, of course. But so people could identify, like, oh, that's me. That could be me up there. And then when the male figure comes in, it says, I make 7,000 more because I'm male. And then the Asian woman comes in and she says, I make 9,000 more because I'm Asian or something, And so you start to see, like, oh, wow, this is real. These are real people. These are, that's me up there, and I'm represented. And so it starts to get at more of that, and it goes to the design question again, that a lot of different design factors can lead to that emotion as well. That's probably as close as we've got to doing something like that, but I like that idea. Any other questions?
Let's thank our speaker.